Welcome to episode 30c of the Tax Professionals podcast, which is part of a mini 3-part series providing guidance on how to pass the ATT and CTA exams. In this episode, BPP lecturer Nitin Rabher gives you advice on how to pass the CTA Advanced Technical Papers.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
This is the last episode of the mini 3-part series which gives guidance on passing the ATT and CTA exams. The other 2 episodes in this mini series are on how to pass an ATT or CTA resit and how to pass the CTA Advanced Technical Papers. Both of these episodes are already live. This and the Advanced Technical episode are more tailored to the owner managed businesses or OMB papers, but they still contain lots of useful information and advice for the other Advanced Technical and APS papers too. There are also a bunch of other podcasts and resources that me and Nitin have created to help you pass the ATT and CTA exams, and in particular there is a step-by-step guide to help you make your very own revision folder or summary which you can use within the exams whilst they remain open book. The guide includes example content pages and summaries. Links to all these episodes and resources will be in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30c. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30c. TTPP30c just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 30c. Just a note as well, you can listen to any episodes of the podcast in most podcast apps of your choice, which includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts and Spotify, but just searching for the Tax Professionals Podcast. Without further ado, let's get to it. So this is the second part of, I suppose, the podcast series in relation to the CTA OMB papers. The other one is on the Advanced Technical Paper, but this one is being solely focused on the APS paper instead. Again, I'm joined by Nitin, BPP tax lecturer, who at this rate, with the amount of times he's been on recently, is probably going to end up taking over the podcast.
No chance.
So, given that we have got the other episode coming out as well, could you just tell us a bit about the APS paper for OMB? I suppose particularly the differences between that and the Advanced Technical paper.
Yeah, so I think the biggest mistake that students make is that they will sometimes say that I want to sit both papers at the same time. So that'll be the OMB APS paper and the OMB Advanced Technical, or TOMC and the TOLC papers. And what the problem is with the APS paper is that it is applied. It's applied knowledge from the minute you start the exam. Okay, so so the format is, so if we do a compare and contrast very quickly, on the Advanced Technical paper, you will get 6 questions ranging from marks from 5 marks, 15 marks, 10 marks, 20 marks, okay, with broken down specific requirements. So that's the Advanced Technical. The APS paper is completely different. With the application planning skills paper, what happens is that 2 weeks before the actual exam, the students will receive a pre-scene. So there'll be some very basic information about the individual, the company, or whatever entity you're dealing with. And some students will then take the opportunity to try and predict what will come up in the exam. I recommend you do not do that, because you will, be often caught off guard, but get comfortable with the content. And then on the actual exam day, in the APS paper, you are required to write a report. It is a report. So it's not broken down into various questions or requirements. It is a report. And the information that you're presented with in the exam will be then in the form of exhibits. So there could be some letters, correspondence, financial information. And during that exam time, you need to spend at least 45 minutes to an hour planning that paper. You have to plan. The planning takes 45 minutes to 1 hour. If that's terrifying some of you already, thinking, really, we have to spend that long? Yes, you do. Okay, and also during that time, you've also got to get your calculations done. So you can then understand, the impact of the numbers. And I know, Jack, you're going to come on to various questions later on so the students understand the difference. And the main thing is it's then the report format, okay, which we can look at separately. But the difference here is in an APS paper, it is a report that you need to do, but the first hour will be taken up with planning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the students, but 45 minutes to an hour still makes me feel nervous having to spend
Yeah.
that much time doing the plan.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's
I know it's different now to when I sat it, because it used to have a different name. I can't remember what it used to be called. You probably can, but I know it is different now, so I won't go into what it was like for me. You got a few points there that I want to pick up on. I'm going to start first with the sitting both the OMB papers, the advanced technical and the APS in the same sitting. Because I actually did do that. I did human capital and I did them both in one sitting. And my logic behind that was the knowledge is the same. I didn't want to refresh the knowledge in a different sitting. So can I just understand a bit why you recommend that students don't do it in the same sitting?
Okay, this is a difficult one. All right. I can understand where students say to me, it makes sense to do both papers. And if I was a student, I'd want to do both papers. What I tend to find is if you've got all the time in the world and you're able to dedicate 100% to both papers, that's fine. But the bit where students fall down, Jack, is they treat both papers the same in how they approach it. Okay, so the number of retakers I've spoken to where they've said, I've passed one paper but failed the other, because the way you articulate the answer is very different. Does that make sense? And I always say, look, if you're able to switch between the two papers, if you can comfortably write an advanced technical piece and then switch to the skill set that's required for APS, okay, then you have my blessings. You have my full support to do both. Okay?
What you're saying does make sense. It absolutely does. I personally found that doing them both in the same sitting helped each other, though, because I was using the knowledge more. I had more questions. I do fully appreciate the different approach to each exam. I think that is hard to do, particularly when you start off doing, I suppose, practice questions for both. But as you say, I think if you can get comfortable with that, then it's okay to do it in both sittings. But Nitin is much more experienced in this area than me, so if he's suggesting do them in separate sittings, then I'd fully consider that as an option.
Jack, what's happened? So ultimately, I'll never tell a student what to do. I can only advise. And 9 times out of 10, Libby and I have seen this, okay, at BPP, that a lot of students quit the APS paper halfway through because they can't cope with the workload. Yeah, they suddenly realize, and also on my courses, if you're coming on my OMB APS course, we literally start with a scenario straight away, Jack. So there's no knowledge build-up. It's assumed knowledge. Yeah. So that's what I think back when you and I did it, okay, the knowledge it wasn't as applied as it is now. So I literally jump into a trade and asset sale straight away. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whereas some students haven't even been taught the trade and asset on the advanced technical side. So they're just completely struggling. So that's why, and I say to students, is once you've understood your advanced technical content, the APS paper is ridiculously easy. But it's getting that knowledge in firsthand, which I think is critical.
Just, I think an obvious follow-on then anyway is because we've kind of already touched upon the knowledge being similar across the APS and the advanced technical. Is there actually any differences in knowledge that you need for both papers, or is it completely identical for both of them?
Well, the APS is more. So with the APS paper, they also expect students to have the awareness knowledge. So for example, in OMB APS and taxation of large corporates APS, you need to know your VAT, you need to know your stamp duty, okay, which doesn't feature in those advanced technical papers. And so we do spend at least 30% of our time having to go over those bits and bobs to show how they identify in scenarios. And so if you're doing both papers at the same time, you also end up having to learn the awareness content as well, which at that point students find overwhelming. So you're right, the OMB is a perfect match. Okay. Whereas, so I'll give you an example, Jack. On the taxation of major corporates, advanced technical, purchase of own shares is not on the syllabus. But when you do the application of planning skills paper for taxation of large corporates, the purchase of own shares is on the syllabus. So there is that. So students need to be very aware when you're doing both papers, what's in which paper.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, I don't know if you know this, but I did the ATT CTA joint pathways, which meant that I actually didn't do the awareness paper. So that was actually a bit of a worry for me, actually, when going into doing the final paper for me. Have you had any other students in that situation, and what do you suggest to them?
It causes a lot of stress. It causes a lot of anxiety for some students because they're thinking, I haven't studied this. And so at the moment, the examiner has been very kind on both papers, where the awareness stuff has come up in a very basic format. Okay, so, and I can't speak for other tuition providers, but on my taught on revision for APS, I make sure the students are fully equipped with what awareness content they need. So we do cover it and we do provide the support. So yeah, I think it's important that we do that. And I think some students, to their detriment, spend more time on the awareness when they don't need to. It's a very fine balancing act as to how much you need to know. And that's covered effectively in class.
I think the key word is awareness, isn't it, really? That's the word to focus on, is you don't need to know it back to front. You just need to know enough to highlight that it might be an issue, or say something very basic about the topic.
Absolutely, you're right.
So in terms of length of this paper, is it a 3-hour 15 exam like the others?
I think under the rules, I think it's 3.5 hours. If I'm right, I'm pretty sure. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Yeah, and yeah, so it's got this. It's the same time. It's the same time. The interesting thing about this APS paper is that there is no grade in terms of percentage. Okay, so it's not marked like in the form of, marks out of 100. Okay, it's marked on competency. Okay, it's marked on competency, and we'll be covering this on various. There's a lot more information on this on the CIOT websites on this. But you have marks 1 to 5, and you need to score a minimum average of 3. Okay, there's an average of 3, and the skills that you need here are all to do with it's part knowledge, it's judgment, it's presentation, it's language. All of these things are taken into account. Okay, and having to spot all the core issues as well is very, very important. And so it's difficult to illustrate on a podcast, and that's why I do say to students, make sure you go to the CIOT website. There's a whole host of information, and if you've booked onto a course with a tuition provider, then they will provide you with lots and lots of useful information. But it's very important that it's a lot about skill, this paper, hence the application planning skills paper. It's about providing the client with a solution to their issues and concerns. Okay, and that's what this is about. So it could be, for example, a share sale, or it could be buying a company. Now, at that point, many students will say, well, how's that different to an advanced technical paper? Because that also comes up in those papers. And the difference in an application planning paper is that there'll be a lot more going on with that share sale or acquisition. You'll be having to bring in other taxes, like for OMB, there'll be inheritance tax you've got to think about. There could be VAT implications, okay? And throughout the paper, and if I talk about the report now, Jack, unless you want me to do it later on, is the way you present the answer is actually in sections. So you would firstly do an introduction that is in a certain format. The introduction will then have the scope of the report together with a disclaimer. So that's something you wouldn't do in an advanced technical paper. You then have the exec summary. The exec summary is a capture of all the core points you've identified for the client. You then have the main body of the report, where you then analyze everything and have recommendations at the end of each section. And you also have to create an appendix. So all your calculations must never, I repeat, must never ever go into the main body of the report. They should all be in an appendix, clearly numbered, clearly labeled, and that is the minimum requirement for an APS paper. And what I would urge everyone to do who's listening to this recording is go to the CIOT website for past papers and actually look at the candidate scripts that they've posted, because they are fantastic examples of what you need to produce on the day. So that's the kind of format of the APS paper.
Just coming very briefly back to the marking on this and the 1 to 5, am I right in thinking that if you get below a certain grade in one area, then it's an automatic fail?
No, it's averaged out. So also, so I think it's averaged out. So what you do is you add up all the marks, and then you've got to score overall a minimum 3.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if you got like 1 in one area and then a 5 in another, as long as it averages out to 3 overall, it's a pass.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's kind of the average score then for people on this? Because I imagine some people fail and stuff. Do people typically get 3? Do many get 4 or 5s?
That information is never really kind of made public, Jack. So it's really hard to gauge. What I would say is for OMB APS, the questions that the examiner has sat have been really fair. They have been really, really fair, and I'm not sure of the pass rate to hand, but certainly the May 2021 exam, it was a very, very fair paper. Mm-hmm. And I think, like I said, the main mistake that students make in an APS paper is they knowledge dump too much. And so if you're knowledge dumping, see, in an advanced technical paper, Jack, if you knowledge dump, there's no negative marking. Yeah, there's no negative marking because you're just marked on what correct points you've identified. Whereas if you knowledge dump in an APS paper, that you can be marked down in the sense that you haven't applied appropriate judgment. Yeah, you've contained too much irrelevant content. Yeah, so because it's a report, so that can work against you. So sometimes, and that's where often students go wrong. They write too much. So on my APS paper, on my APS courses, what I do is I actually get students to do a report from day 1 of the talk course. Yeah, so I will ask for 2 reports on the talk course, and I will do a non-technical review. And that's where we spend a lot of time helping students to actually get exam ready. Then on the exam course, there are then three exams, 3 questions they can do, 2 of which I do a non-technical review on.
Yeah.
So kind of make sure that they're on point, and that the progress that most students make, because the first report will often be awful. It will be, it'll be a car crash. but then literally the final one that they do is literally a piece of art. It's a work of art. It's fantastic. So yeah, it's a really good journey that these students go on.
I mean, you can tell me whether you think this is a bad idea, but I feel like what the APS paper is trying to do really is test how good you are at writing advice in the real world. So something that a client is actually going to appreciate. So if you can think about talking about the knowledge dumping, you've said you can get marked down for just knowledge dumping. But just imagine if you're a client and you were getting completely irrelevant information and it wasn't applied to your circumstances, you would be pretty annoyed. So maybe if you just bearing that in mind as you're answering the question as well, surely that will help you to not just dump knowledge that isn't needed to be applied to the client circumstances.
Yeah, agreed. I 100% agree with that. And I think the exec summary is critical. So the exec summary is one area, believe it or not, that so many students struggle. And what some students do, they just copy out the main body of the report, but in a shorter form, which is wrong. And what I encourage students to do is, look, take a step back. Why has the client commissioned this report? Okay, what are the top 3 things you are going to tell that client. So for example, on say on a share acquisition, Jack, let's say you've commissioned a report to say, Nick, can you do me a report on I want to purchase all the shares in Libby Limited? Yeah. And in the letter and the correspondence with the advisor, Jack, you've made it very clear what your concerns are, what your issues are. Yeah. And one of my students wrote, oh, you do not have to pay any VAT on a share acquisition. Okay. And I said to the student, I go, is that the first thing that the client wants to know? Is that the first thing? Is that the most important thing? And he goes, well, no, actually, what was the most important thing? He said, actually, that there were some major issues with this. There were some problems if they buy the shares. Perfect. And that's where I think students go wrong, is really think about what does the client want to know? And if you can just have that kind of technical empathy with the question and the scenarios, you're going to pass that exam. You know, and the other issue as well, Jack, is, for example, in advanced technical, if there is a relief, like it could be rollover relief or incorporation relief or business asset disposal relief, you know, there's nothing wrong in putting a little bit of technical background. Yeah. But in an APS paper, all of that is waffle. If you start talking about the theory, that's not going to get you any marks because the client doesn't care. So you literally have to jump straight in and say, this transaction will qualify for business asset disposal relief because this is the tax impact. We recommend you make the claim by this date. So it's the actual writing, although it's the same technical content, the writing style and the way you present it in the answer is completely different. And that's why students fail an APS paper. Not because they're technically ready, they're not adapting it to proper advice in the real world, like you say.
Yeah. And it is a difficult skill. I mean, there's probably a lot of people who do CTA who work in compliance teams and have never had to write a piece of advice before. So I do get that it's a difficult learning curve. You just got to make sure you spend the time to learn that skill.
And that's why I don't like, especially if you work in a non-planning role, that's where I don't like students doing both papers at the same time. Yeah, that they're the students that struggle. Okay, because it is a brand new skill set.
Yeah. To be fair, that's a good point because I've always worked in kind of an advisory consultancy type role. So yeah, I already had an advantage over students who wouldn't have done that. And I definitely would have found it more difficult if I hadn't have already had experience with writing advice and reports, etc.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed.
So maybe you've already mentioned this already then about particularly knowledge dumping, but are there any particular areas or like syllabus or skills that you think absolutely must be mastered for doing the APS paper for OMB?
I would say in terms of technical, you've got to know your syllabus. It's not as you've got to know your content, but what I find with the APS paper that they're not technically picky. So I actually think the advanced technical paper is more difficult than the APS paper, technically, if you want me to be honest. Okay, because in the advanced technical, they will go for the obscure points. I have never yet seen an APS paper where they've done that. They kept the scenario very, very open, very broad. And so it allows the candidate to actually then advise. So it's a lovely paper, but I think the problem is it's bringing everything together. And so to kind of help you here, a student needs to have a very clear game plan of how you approach an APS paper. And I'm going to give a lot of my secrets away today. All right, you can have it today. I'm in a good mood. So I will tell you guys what I tell my students to do. The first thing I tell my students to do is in the plan, when you're planning an APS paper, a lot of students plan with long sentences. So they're effectively writing the answer, which is rubbish. Okay. In the plan, you've got to identify the core points and problems. So you could say, right, oh, he's a higher rate taxpayer, BADR, these are the conditions. So, be very quick on the plan. The second thing I then tell my students to do is get all the calculations done first, right? Because without those numbers, you are not going to pass. So for example, in the May 2021 paper, Jack, It was all on incorporation relief for OMB APS. So what I wanted my students to do very quickly was work out what were the total gains, how much the incorporation relief would have been. And there were also plant and machinery and stock where you can have various elections to avoid a tax charge. So all of that was really set piece. It was textbook approach. So a well-prepped student should have done those numbers first. Once you've got the numbers, you then want to think about the tax impact. Okay, are we going to pay tax? Are we going to, is there going to be a relief available? So you go through all the motions. Then once you've done that, you then want to do the introduction very, very quickly. Okay, you would have practiced this already through previous past papers. So the introduction should have been relatively straightforward with the requirement, the scope, and the disclaimer. Now, this is a game changer. I reckon there are many tutors out there who are going to disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. You, as a student, decide what's best for you. And this was a game changer for my students. I said to my students, look, you've done the plan, you've done your numbers. At this point, you should really know what the answer is, what advice you're going to give your clients. And my students agree with me. They go, yeah, Nick, I know what I'm going to do here. So I say to my students, why don't you do your exec summary first? Why don't you get the final conclusion done straight away? Okay. And do you know what? The ones that even the retakers loved it. They said it actually gave me more direction as to what I was doing. So we worked on this in class. I went through so many past papers showing that this is how you write it. So when they get to the main body of the report, Jack, they're literally now just advising. Yeah, they're a lot more relaxed. They're a lot more, they know what it's feeding into. That is my top secret in helping people pass APS.
It's an interesting approach, that's for sure. I think, as you say, let students decide what's right for them and what isn't, and maybe give it a go if they haven't before already to see how it feels. I can see how that would help you to structure the rest of your answer, though, if you know what the important points are, and then you can elaborate around them in the main body of the report. So I do see that. I think I would just be worried that I might miss some important points from the exec summary if I did it that way around. But I suppose you could always come back and add those in at the end.
And I'm good, Jack. I've been teaching this paper for over 22 years. I changed my approach last year because I actually felt because of the benefits of exam 4 and everything else. And I tried it. I wasn't initially. I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't. I thought this may not work. So we practiced it for the May sitting with my students. Every single student loved it. They said this is actually better. Because the other way, because historically what students were doing, Jack, is they were just writing the report, but not thinking about the end game. And many even never got to doing the exec summary. They ran out of time. Yeah, which is a more of a serious problem in the exam. And so by doing it this way, you're closing things down. Yeah, you're thinking, okay, so you know what we're going to advise, you know what the problems are. It made doing the main report a lot easier. So I was pleasantly surprised. And I agree with you. I think it does come down to the individual. You do what's best for you. If you feel like you want to close it at the end and you're in complete control, go for it. But yeah, you've got to do what works for you. And I will continue with doing the exec summary first, definitely, for November.
I suppose as well at the moment, actually, this is on a computer now, isn't it? So you can actually go and move stuff around as well if you need to after.
Absolutely.
Yeah, actually thinking about it, I'm coming more around to the idea the more you're talking about it, thinking this how it would play out in practice.
And I'm quite honest with my students, Jack. When I'm trying something new, I will, I will ask my students for feedback and advice, so yeah. So good.
So we have talked about quite a few things already then, but could we just kind of, I suppose, very briefly at a high level go through the stages of preparing for this exam? Because when we do when you're doing the advanced technical, there's kind of almost the study phase, although I appreciate Libby said she always joins that and revision as one. And then there's the revision stage, and there's kind of the few weeks before the exam. What kind of are the stages in your head for preparing for this exam?
So what I do for OMB APS is I think it's critical that our students go on a talk course. with a tuition provider. So many people try and self-study. And so what I've done is I've produced a technical document where I've put as many scenarios as possible that have come up in the exam over the last 22 years. And what we do is we work through those scenarios together. So I'm not teaching anyone anything new. Remember, that's assumed knowledge from the advanced technical. And so what we're doing here is we're looking at exam standard questions from day one, and then showing them how to plan. That's the critical point, showing them how to plan, thinking about the tax impact, and then looking at the execution of the answer. Yeah, in how it then comes up in the main body of the report. Okay, together with the recommendations. How should you recommend? What should you be recommending? And how does that work? So that is more about really getting the student to start doing things properly. There's no theory here. Let's look at as many questions as possible. And during the talk phase, Jack, like I said, we then encourage students to practice. So the main thing is beyond the questions that I review non-technically, okay, students are encouraged to literally plan and practice answering as many questions as possible. Yeah, so they get into the habit, especially those who work in a non-advisory role. They need to do more of that. Those like yourself who work in advisory planning don't have to do that much. So it does come down to the individual. And revision is no different. On revision, I give my students 1 hour to plan a question, and then we go through it together. We literally say, did you spot these points? Did you do this? And we get a really nice discussion going, and then we work on the exec summary together. Okay, we create it together. So it's a really nice way of boosting their confidence. Yeah, Nick, I got those points. I've got these points, and then they get to then do the final answer at home, which I then review. So there's no, and like I said, on my revision course, I then go through all the awareness level bits in the afternoon. So, we'll also address, like VAT. Most OMB students, or most, and even TOLC students hate VAT. So we'll go through that, make sure they're happy with that, and anything else they want support on. So it's really tailored to that class.
Yeah, makes sense. And then obviously when it comes to like the advanced technical, you suggest that students taking kind of a revision folder or a revision summary to kind of refer to have prompts, etc. Should students do something similar on this paper as well, or do you think there's a different approach to be had?
No, I've produced a contents page checklist for OMB APS. I provide all OMB APS students with my own checklist of key points. That is something that they receive, and I get them to start using that from day one. Okay, so if something like for example, in the May 2021 paper, incorporation, pretty much what came up in the exam was in that checklist. So yeah, so it's developed and built together.
Lucky that students of yours had that then for that exam. Must have been a great advantage.
Oh, absolutely. Most students that came back said that it was such a big help, and yeah, that we were ready. And I just hope they've got through, and that's been working well. So I think for APS, I do, and at BPP, Jack, we've got revision summaries for OMB and TOMC. So if you're a BPP student, you get them for free anyway. But like I said, to anyone who's not a BPP, there are resources and things that, you're providing, you've got, so they can contact you for that.
Yeah. Right at the start of the episode, you mentioned about kind of this pre-seed information that you get. So I'd just like to dig a bit further down in relation to that then. So I suppose first off, what is included in the pre-information? I think you've already alluded to the fact it doesn't include the question, but what is actually included in part of that?
I need your consent here. Would it help if I kind of illustrated the May 2021 paper to give you more of a practical idea?
Yeah, you go for that.
Okay. So in the OMB May 2021 APS paper, the information that we were given I think it was on a page of A4 actually. It was this person called Adrian Charles, who was a sole trader. He lived abroad. He was UK domiciled, but non-UK resident. He had a sole trading business in the UK, and he was divorced. And he basically had assets abroad, and his business manager ran the company, ran the sole trading business. My apologies. Okay, and that was it. That was pretty much the information. And there's a bit of financial information. Yeah, so we worked out, I think he was a basic rate taxpayer. Okay, and that was it. That was the extent of the pre-scene. Okay, and what I then did is on the final day of revision, we go through the pre-scene. Okay, we go through the pre-scene, and what students buy into is my experience of what kind of things could the client ask questions on. Now, we make it very clear, anyone listening to this recording, okay, I do not predict what's coming up in that exam. I do not say to students, this is coming up, that's coming up. That's never going to happen. Okay. But what I do using my experience, we say, okay, if we have a sole trader who's abroad and who has a UK sole trading business, what kind of things might this person do? There were no children involved. He had no children. So you can immediately rule out certain things, Jack, like succession planning. There's certain things straight away. And I say to my students, if that was one of your clients, are you going to be really talking about spouse exemption when he's divorced? So that's, but people do that. That's where the non-relevance bit comes in. So you got to just kind of say, okay, fine, yeah, we're not going to be going down that path, right? So I then spent 3 to 4 hours on that final revision day. We went through every scenario, yeah, to the point it could have been a partnership. He forms a partnership with his business manager, or they form a company, they award him shares. We went through everything. And thankfully, for the last, all the previous sittings, that 4-hour session that I've done, the examiner set something very similar.
So it doesn't actually sound like they give you much information then really before the exam, because it sounds like 101 scenarios could be asked around the information that you're given.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've got a sole trader, Jack, right? If you're dealing with a sole trader at work, okay, who's divorced, no kids, okay, and I said, yeah, he's going to come, I reckon. And we even dealt with him just staying offshore. We dealt with every angle. You're preparing it for a meeting. I want to discuss. Well, he could be selling his business. He could be buying a business. He could be merging. Yeah, you're right. It's 101 things. And so, and we literally went on those 101 things. We did it. We covered it. And the students were so happy, and I even said to the class, I said, I think this may involve a commercial property, an acquisition. And we then went through all the timing issues, and lo and behold, that actually came up.
Yeah.
And some students will be thinking, oh God, that you're amazing, technically, wow. No, I'm not. This is not, you can't give any kind of, gratitude to the tutor here or praise for the tutor. This is just commercial stuff. Usually this is what clients do. You're doing it on experience, and so it's just being sensible. And I think that, and there are certain things clients are going to want to do. Otherwise the examiner's got nothing to test you on. We even got ready for terminal loss relief. We did all of that just in case, but that didn't come up. So it's yeah. Of the 101 things we cover, a few things will come up.
I suppose it's a good test of your technical knowledge, though, isn't it, to think of all those possibilities that could come up? A really good exercise.
And also, Jack, I want to add it in, but in November 2020, there are certain things we didn't pick up. Yeah, so in November 2020 APS, again, I picked up there'll be R&D, there'll be other things going on. But what the examiner did in that one, it was that I think it was, if I get it right, so this person, so the November 2020 paper, we had an individual who worked for a company, and he had an idea that involved R&D. And his existing company that he worked for was happy to support him, but they were also happy for him to go it alone. And so what it then came down to, Jack, was that it was either a partnership versus company. Okay. But interestingly enough, in the partnership though, there was a corporate partner. So, and because of that, okay, you then had a non-active partner scenario, no AIA for corporate partners, okay, and also in a company, the R&D relief is a lot quicker because you can surrender your relief for tax credits and all that kind of stuff. So we're not always going to get everything right, but you still needed your core knowledge to know the key differences. Yeah. And so whilst we do our best to kind of say, these are the things, the examiner will always throw it. We always tell you, look, there will be a curveball. Okay. You've just got to be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
Thankfully, in the May 2021 paper, I couldn't see any curveballs. It was a very, very fair, balanced paper. So I think students were very lucky.
Yeah. And I'm not pointing this out to be like, oh, Nitin, you missed the actual question that did come up for that exam. But I think just given the fact that you, with 22 years of experience, didn't think of all the scenarios that could come up, just goes to show that students shouldn't try and do the same thing and neglect some areas of the syllabus based on that. You still need to have that core understanding and knowledge, as you've just mentioned.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I make it really clear, guys, I'm not predicting what's coming up. This is from my experience. This is what I have seen.
Yeah.
And even as tutors, we're still learning.
Yeah. At best, it's a guess, isn't it? What's coming up? At best, it's a guess.
Yeah.
How far in advance do people actually? How far in advance do you get the pre-seen information? Then is it a few weeks before, or is it more than that?
It's released 2 weeks before the real exam.
Mm-hmm. And then we've kind of talked about how students should use that then anyway to prepare for it. It sounds like they should definitely know the information that's on there almost back to front, so that they can use it easily in the exam, and then have a think about the questions that could be asked based on that, but don't just think that they're the only ones that could come up.
Agreed, totally. I think my worry would be for the self-study students. I think the other tuition providers are very good at also managing the students' expectations. And we make it clear from day one, we are not guessing or predicting what's coming up, or we're not going to do that. We'll help you within the parameters of what we have in the pre-scene, but you've got to expect anything can be tested. So yeah.
Good. So I'm going to ask you for one answer to this one, and follow the rules this time, Nitin.
I will.
What is the one thing that you think students struggle mostly with the APS exam for OMB? And can you just give your tip on how to overcome that?
I would say the main bit they struggle on is, I would say, execution of the answer. I'd say the planning is usually done really well, but actually writing the answer for those that don't do advisory work is probably the most common problem. And the solution is practice, and get feedback.
Yeah, and that's a really important one, because when you're doing CTA, really, I think a lot of students probably focus on the technical content and actually knowing the tax rules, but that is not the most important skill in this exam. It's obviously important, but the advice is it's the whole thing that's being tested, really, isn't it? It's the primary thing that's being tested.
Yeah, and what will surprise students who are listening to this recording, I've actually seen students pass APS and fail the advanced technical. Yeah, so and people need to, and it's shocking as it sounds. Okay, the APS is not as technically involved as the advanced technical, and that's why it's such a lovely paper. But you need to know your technical, to be able to be at peace with it.
I think that's probably covered everything then, Nitin, for this. Have you got kind of any final things you want to say that we haven't covered so far about APS, or do you think you've covered everything from your side?
I think one last bit, Jack, is one common question I get asked is, if you're doing both papers, advanced technical and APS, the question I often get asked is, do I just use one revision folder? No. Your revision folder for advanced technical will be different to the APS paper. Okay, so and there are two separate revision summaries out there. Revision checklists, contents page checklists out there. So do keep two separate folders, and make sure that you split your time between practicing the both different types of papers, because they're two different skill sets. So that's the only last bit of advice, really, Jack.
just on that then, what is the difference between the two folders then for you? What's the main difference between the one for advanced technical and the one for APS?
I think it's more the content as well. It's a lot of the obscure stuff isn't in there. So, for example, Jack, if you're looking at qualifying loan interest relief, if you acquire shares in a closed company or lend to a partnership, we all know about the restriction that the interest that you can deduct is restricted at the higher of £50,000 and 25% rule. In an advanced technical paper, they can go into a lot of depth about how you calculate that and what you do. Whereas in an APS paper, it's simply bringing it as an issue and then applying it to relevance. So it's the level of detail that you don't need in an APS paper. It's more about looking at the broader issues and just thinking about things slightly differently. For example, in an APS paper, if you're talking about a sole trader, okay, a lot of students will talk about unlimited liability, but you can then take out insurances to mitigate that risk. That kind of content wouldn't be needed in an advanced technical paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so there are key, I think there are more salient commercial points that you get credit for in an APS paper, which will be ignored in an advanced technical. And so that's why they're slightly different. That's the reasoning.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose you could put them together, but then they're just going to be crammed and it's just going to become confusing. So having them separate is the smartest thing to do there.
And there's one really flashy point, Jack, if you don't mind me bringing this in, is the example I use is gift relief. So with gift relief, we know that for 2021, that it's 4 years after the end of the tax year. So the gift relief claim has to be made by the 5th of April, 2025, joint election. Yeah. So in an advanced technical paper, had you just written down what I've just said would get you full marks because you've mentioned joint election and you've mentioned the due date. In an APS paper, that advice is rubbish. We're not going to say to a client, you've got until 2025 to make the election, because if you do that, that causes a cash flow disadvantage because you're saying to the client, well, pay your tax now, get your relief later. Yeah. So although you mention it briefly that you have until 2025, you actually say to the client, we recommend, to obtain an immediate benefit of this relief, that you make the claim when filing your tax return by the 31st of Jan 2023. Can you see the difference?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the golden nugget. And I think there are many people right now thinking, I get it. See, have you written that bit in your advanced technical? I don't think they'll give you a mark for it.
Yeah.
Because, and that's the difference. It's those little things.
It's the difference between just stating some facts and then actually giving your advice based on the facts. That's the difference.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Nick, for your tips and advice today. I'm sure, as always, students will find it very useful. And just to end it as well, I think Nitin's mentioned a few times throughout this anyway, if you've got any questions at all, please feel free to get in contact with me or Nitin, and we'll be happy to help. You can get me by email on LinkedIn. You can get Nit from LinkedIn. And if you do even want to schedule a call, then I think we'd both be happy to do that.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jack.
The show notes of this episode will include a link to all the other episodes and resources that me and Nitin have created to help you pass the ATT and CTA exams. This includes an episode on how to pass a CTA or ATT resit, and also an episode on how to pass the CTA advanced technical papers. The latter, like this episode, is more tailored to the owner managed business or OMB papers, but is still relevant if you're sitting a different advanced technical paper. Just a reminder, there is a step-by-step guide on how to create your very own revision folder or summary, along with example contents pages and summaries, which can be downloaded from the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30c. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP30c. If you'd like to speak to me or Nitin about anything exam related, including the revision folders and summaries or something else, then please don't hesitate to get in contact with either of us, because we'd both be more than happy to help out. Our contact details will be in the show notes, but you can easily get in contact with both of us on LinkedIn. For me, that's Jack Bonehill, and for Nitin, it's Nitin Rabher. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful tips to help you progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.